Let's do this, senpai!
The enemy readings have decreased?
Holla ballers! Shall we talk about Persona 5? By popular request of my team and many other people, some people wanted me to clarify my thoughts and feelings on Persona 5 because it is a beloved game, like overwhelmingly positive reviews across the board. Fantastic game, and seemingly, even though, and let's be clear on this, I was incentivized and pushed to play Persona 5 because of our enormous support from Twitch and from you guys in order to play, to do what we do, right? It's as simple as that. We had a sub goal for it. The guys hit it. A lot of people over the... I want to be clear, they weren't being mean. A lot of people genuinely believed that I would love this game, but my perceptions of anime in general and my general dislike of anime also made people think that you're not playing it just because it's like an anime game, and it's a really good game, and you should check it out. And we think you would really enjoy it, and obviously there's been an ongoing sort of effort to try and get me into anime as part joke. Some people took serious, some people obviously joking. Who realize it doesn't matter if I don't like anime, that doesn't stop anyone else liking it. But they definitely wanted me to try it out because they believed Persona 5 is a fantastic game. And so we hit the goal, and the date was set to play Persona 5. Now, surprisingly, I played longer than a day. Now, that's not just out of sort of giving it a fair try. I go in blind, which is something I like to do, and I didn't realize many things about Persona 5, particularly that it was like a full advancement of the retro turn-based RPG style, which is something I adore. I've done excessive playthroughs of things like Chrono Trigger, all the old-school Final Fantasies, etc., and they rate as some of my favorite games of all time. The turn-based system, especially when dealing with difficult content, is really intriguing and immersive because one false move can put you in a really bad situation, but when you nail it and you get it right, it's very satisfying to prepare for what's coming like 4 moves ahead. And the same can be applied to things like Divinity and of course Baldur's Gate 3, which we'll be playing in December. So when I discovered that, I was like, oh, it's a turn-based game. I had no idea. I had absolutely no idea this was a turn-based game, and very quickly discovered that this is the modernization of such a system and is actually really good. Like, unequivocally an excellent system. I loved the system of gaining the familiars, being able to mix and match which elements they could fight with, that Pokemon style of which counters which, getting into combat and then figuring out, certainly when we got to the bosses, of, okay, we need to set up for something that's going to happen like 6 or 7 moves ahead. That stuff, really enjoyed. I also particularly, and I don't mind saying this, I enjoyed the idea of the relationship system. That was cool. It's like little side quests, you get this downtime between missions, and I did like the idea of having dates in the diary, in the calendar, when certain events had to happen by, but if you chose to, you could either go straight to it, or you could go and explore the world a bit more. You had the choice of what you wanted to do. Did you want to go and see certain characters, perhaps characters you liked and disliked, and then go and advance those relationships to see where those storylines go, certainly in comparison to something like Starfield, right? I know it's a meme these days to talk about Starfield. Some people love or hate it, but one of the big things that turned me off about the game is discussing things with other characters that just didn't go anywhere, and it was just disappointing. It's like, okay, if you're going to give me extra dialogue choices, or maybe even a side quest to go along with characters, but it's just the illusion of something happening and nothing really happens, or I get a dialogue choice and it's like, okay, I'm going to mix the pot here. I'm going to try and throw a wrench in the works, and just nothing happens. It ultimately ends up back to the same dialogue choice. That's disappointing. I want a good RPG to account for the fact that I'm role-playing. I want to be a certain type of character, and there are people I'm going to like and dislike and do things along those lines. I also didn't particularly mind the advancement of the stat system, which was increasing your guts, your intelligence, and having limited choices on which ones you choose to advance. Apologize to my boy! No, my guts needs to be... Ah! Come on, dude! So maybe one night I want to watch The X-Files in order to increase my guts by watching a scary TV show. Or perhaps I want to sit downstairs and do my homework to increase my intelligence, or I want to learn to be social by working a job and being in front of other people, and advancing that. And then very clearly the game gave me choices with certain characters, like, hey, you're just not smooth enough, you're not smart enough, you're not wise enough in order to deal with these situations.
I don't care about the rapist anymore. You don't understand my DVD problems. I know there's a pedophile around, but I have this DVD player, right? And it's really good. And I can't plug it in. You're not listening to me, Ann, because the cat makes me go to bed. And all I want to do is I want to plug my fucking DVD player in. And
I also, unironically, I did kind of like that the school lessons, which feel like in many other games would be an absolute just waste of time, like trying to set the scene or something like that, came back. And then you had a test at the end. And it's kind of funny that that stuff is happening. So that was great. Like, the actual gameplay, I really enjoyed, and there's no getting away from that. I really enjoyed it. I liked all those elements, and I think if you were looking for a good RPG that was utilizing that old school style, Persona 5 is it. And I have there's no mystery in my mind as to why Persona 5 is regarded as highly as it is, because underneath the anime exterior is an extremely solid game. A very solid game with tight gameplay, interesting mechanics going on, and lots of choice and options for you to do. And on top of that, the stories were, well, the initial story, let's start there. Let's go over to the anime stuff then. So obviously, I don't really get, and it is probably to do with my age, I'm not going to deny that, I don't really get the fascination with the anime characters. Now, I will say I do come in with a bias. As much as I try to play these games blind and objective, yes, I'm going into this game with a bias, and that bias is built similar to the way people presented FF14 to me. And that bias is that a lot of the stuff that is in my daily life surrounding the anime world is degenerate stuff, right? And I'm not going to judge anybody here. It's just the way I see it now in my life. But I want to be clear on something, and this will come up again later, is if I was younger, like if I was in my like mid-teens to late teens, I would absolutely probably be enjoying the hell out of this stuff. I really would. And that it falls into like some VTubers. Like some VTubers do it because they just don't want to show their face. That's totally understandable to me. I don't want to show my face on stream for whatever reason. Either I don't want to be recognized in public, or I don't like my physical appearance, or any other reason. And this is more fun. I like to keep my anonymity. Is a great way of using VTubers. However, there's a ton of VTubers that are always the ones that are linked to me, which are extremely over-sexualized. And typically, that involves being in the guise of a young girl. Typically preteen. That is a very common thing. And of course, the memes over the years, like probably the last 10 years, when anime has seen a real surge into the gamer world, has been stuff that is like the old meme of, oh, she looks 12, but she's actually 1,000 years old. And these not jokey, but serious arguments that break out, certainly online and in forums and stuff, that get linked to me of people actively like trying to defend this fascination or sexualization of extremely young girls. But there's some sort of weird justification that's written into the law that seemingly makes it okay. Personally, I'm just not okay with it at all. I find it really creepy. I find it very, very upsetting. And I find it very uncomfortable. It's as simple as that. I do not like the sexualization of very young girls. I don't... whatever law justification you have, that is the body of a very young girl. And I'm not down with it at all. It makes me very... it makes me uncomfortable. It's as simple as that. So that's the mindset I see. Now, I will point out that during our last subathon, when we did the charity to buy presents for children at Christmas for parents who couldn't afford it, Chris, who's a big anime fan, like a huge anime fan, got me to watch several animes. We watched One Punch Man, we watched Paprika, we watched, I'm sorry, Chris, I forget the name, it was Gundam, it was big robot things that were doing stuff. And overall, I found it kind of dull and a little strange. One Punch Man I didn't mind, I thought that was kind of fun, but the gimmick is kind of, you know, the gimmick is said and done in the first couple of episodes and kind of repeats from there with a bit of a story going on, but ultimately the gimmick is that he just beats the shit out of everybody. I'm sure at some point he, like, something survives or whatever, I don't know. But I found that okay. It was kind of fun, but the gimmick wore thin and I haven't felt the need to watch any more of it. But needless to say, it's not like I haven't given anime a chance, or the anime genre. And this is one of the things that Chris called me up on. It's like, you just call everything universally anime. And that's not fair, because it's a style. It's like calling all pizza the same. It's not, right? There's very, very many variations on a theme here. It's just the style that it's drawn in. But I've been using it as a sort of catch-all term from everything from the ultra degenerate to the mega serious, going all the way up to berserk, which of all those kinds of things that are very, very different. Okay. But that is the mindset I went in with, and I was very, very worried going into Persona 5, having watched the trailer, because we watched the trailer before we played it, and immediately was like, okay, there's going to be schoolgirls. and I think I said semi-jokingly, is like, if one of the tentacles appear, I'm out, right? Once there's tentacles appear, and I was very concerned. It's like, okay, if this game, obviously knowing nothing about it, is extremely over-sexualized towards very young girls, I'm not going to be down with it, guys. It's as simple as that. And I want to put something in context here, and I talked about this recently with Zeppler on her podcast, is I am of the age where I'm not 16 and 17, so being attracted to 16 and 17-year-olds is not right for me anymore, guys. That's not okay. And also, in my eyes, 16 and 17-year-olds and even 19-year-olds look like young children to me. It's as simple as that, right? I'm in my late 30s now. Yes, when I see young girls, they look like children. They look very much like children to me, even at like 19 years old. And that might be that might seem odd to some of you, especially the younger ones of you. But that's how I feel now, right? I'm in my late 30s. I find attraction to women, not to girls. That's just the nature of the beast. So I was very worried about that, given that the trailer showed like somebody in a school uniform. I don't get always the schoolgirls. Always. It comes up nearly enough every single time. Always the schoolgirls. Again, creeps me out a little bit. Okay, so I was concerned about that, and I just pointed out, I was like, okay, if this gets really, really weird, then I'm going to drop out. But, okay, we got into Persona 5. It took place in a school. But it wasn't sexualized to start with, which was great. They just happened to be people in a high school. All right, that's fine. Any game that takes place in a high school isn't an immediate turn-off for me, right? There's a boundary that's got to be broken. Just the fact that they're young teens is not just the I'm out straight away. That's not the case at all. There's a nuance to it. So the first story, after discovering how tight and cool the gameplay was really dark. And as many of you know, I enjoy my dark stories. I do. I like the dark stories. It's intriguing. It's fun. It's something that I'd like to play. And the ones that stick with me. If I think back to any RPG, the darker stories are the ones that tend to stick with me. And I've always pointed out, like Divinity Original Sin 2, the extremely dark story that I don't want to spoil here of the Shadow Man was the one that sticks with me to this day, because I'm talking to you about it now. They're similar with the Baron in Witcher 3. It's like, it's extremely dark, it's very messed up, but it's the story that hit hardest, and, you know, it makes me feel things, and I want to feel things when I play games. I don't just want to turn my brain off if I'm playing an RPG. I want to be invested in the story in some way. Not to say I don't like the light-hearted stuff, but that light-hearted stuff done well, and then mixed with something very dark, is my favorite type of RPG. And the story is very dark. Now, as it is of a sexual nature, right? The implication is very strong. I mean, I'm going to talk about some spoilers here, because if you're interested in Persona 5, it's also the opening story, of which I believe there are many, many stories. The implication, of course, is that the gym teacher is essentially molesting the children. Or particularly, he's beating them, like, for sure. He's beating them, pushing them hard. He's giving them broken arms, broken legs. He's messed up. He's intentionally broken the leg of one of the protagonists, and it's very heavily implied that he has either raped or molested one of the girls, who then ends up trying to commit suicide. Like, it was extremely dark, and I was like, oh my god.
She's going to jump!
Oh my fucking god, are we at suicide?
Shiho?
I mean, I kind of want to see how this plays out, right? Although it's of a sexual nature, it's not like flagrantly throwing panties at my face. In fact, it's displaying it in a very, very serious way. Despite the shiny, glossy veneer of the game, it's handling this stuff in an interesting way, with the teens with the prospect of like, hey, if we solve this problem, it might kill the teacher. And the mixed thoughts that would happen, which is like, fuck that guy, I want to kill that guy, or are we becoming murderers? You know, these kind of questions. That was really intriguing to me. Now, my boundaries were pushed a little bit when we go into his mind palace of what he sees himself as, which is a king just walking around in pink pink thong, essentially, with his robe on. He's made a mental image of one of the protagonists just wearing a bikini, and she's 16. And ultimately, he kind of ends up as a giant dick monster that's got girls in cups, because he's basically he's the king and commander. But it made sense. And again, this is sort of something I joke about with the anime degeneracy side, right? The specific degeneracy side, not anime as a whole, is that it's always moving you forward like an inch until you realize you've moved a mile, which is like, okay, we'll start here with a little bit of stuff. And I noticed that through the Mind Palace itself, is earlier on it starts with just sludgy, awful monsters in his mind, but by the time you get to the upper floors, which is near the boss, you're straight up dealing with prostitutes and things. And there are some which I accept is probably like a dark joke, is that, you know, prostitutes are weak to bullets. I picked up on it straight away. It's like, oh, their weakness is bullets. Gross, but I kind of see the dark humor side of what you're going for here, like making that as their elemental weakness is bullets. But still moving forward, it starts to get into more leathery stuff. And one thing Chris pointed out to me here is very much Persona 5 kind of wants its cake and eat it too, in order to appeal to the people who do genuinely want that kind of stuff in there. So here's how it went for me. The first story played out and was done, and I was like invested in it, and nothing although it definitely pushed things towards the end of where I was like, this is kind of getting gross now, I was still much willing to play. Still much willing to play, and wanted to go into the next story and see what happens now, because it became very apparent that the storytelling of the game was almost chapter based. And so, wanting to see the next story was an interesting idea. It's like, okay, are they just going to keep pushing it further and further and further? Or is it going to go in a completely different direction? And one thing I did catch, as much as my audience is trying to protect me, there are obviously people who are like, hey, who's this guy? He's got a lot of viewers who's playing Persona 5. What's going on? And then they kind of got into the mix of it. And I did see some comments which is like, well, if he survived Story 1, he should be fine for the rest of the game because it takes a different direction. That was something that I did spot was being said. And I was like, oh, cool. So we've kind of got past the sexualization type stuff, and it really wasn't that bad. In the story context, it made a lot of sense. And so into the second story we go, which was the art dealer. And I was like, is this story going anywhere? Because the biggest crime, we've gone from somebody who was potentially or heavily implied to be a pedophile, abusing children, led to a suicide, like very heavy things, to a guy who was basically an art thief. Now, obviously, if you're an artist, you're like, yeah, fuck that guy completely. Like, I get it, but it's in the boundaries of the sliding scale of crimes. It didn't seem to be that bad, right, in comparison to what we'd just been through. And obviously part of my intrigue in checking Story 2 was that, how are they upping the ante, like, from where they just went? They started with suicide, pedophilia, beating, child abuse. Now we're going to intellectual property theft, you know, things like that. So I was curious as to how this story played out. And that's when it took a little bit of a weird turn for me. And my boundary was pushed. And it's my personal boundary, which was that the young artist whose ideas are being stolen by the master artist tries to convince the female protagonist that she should pose nude. And she's age 16. I want to point out for the people who get into these weird arguments, and I hope I really don't see it, is that 16 is a legal age of sexual consent in the UK. It's still not comfortable with me in my late 30s. Right? That's not a law. I'm not Michael Baying it while I'm pulling out a... if you guys haven't seen this in one of the Transformers movies, there's a guy with a pre-legal girl. I think she's under the age of legal consent, but he has like a laminated card that he carries with him as to why it's okay under like Romeo and Juliet laws and stuff. Like, he carries a card to say it's fine. And I'm like, that is so fucking weird, dude. It's so weird. And it kind of felt like that's how I feel a little bit. It's like, technically this is legal, but still it's a bit cringe in my eyes. Now, at the time, it seemed like it was for artistic purposes, because I have nothing against nude modeling, obviously, but whatever. Like, nude modeling is totally fine. It was just, and I thought it was coming from the perspective of, like, no, this is a serious artist, she's a beautiful woman, that he wanted to pose nude. But then it took a dark turn to try and manipulate him, because clearly, once she started undressing, and they made a bit of a funny scene out of it, she's wearing, like, 100,000 layers of clothes. It made a funny scene out of it. But when she started to remove her clothes, he started noticeably sweating. I was like, oh, okay, so it is a pure sexual thing. Like, he just wants to see this girl naked, and he's trying to trick her into showing off her naked body, which is, now it's getting fucked up for me. But then they need to gain access to a certain part of the house, and she manipulates him in that way by stripping and teasing. And I want to be clear, this was my boundary, and you might say that's nowhere near as bad as what you saw earlier on. And, okay, that's fine. But for me, who has friends who have daughters who are of that age, that's kind of what I see. And I did point this out, is that I'm no angel at all. Like, when I was like when I was younger, and like games like Duke Nukem were out, and I always cite Duke Nukem because I remember this specifically, is that when I was alone watching the PC, and people were in the room, I absolutely went to the strippers in that game, which were pixelated breasts, and you could just spam the spacebar or interact, and they would just, like, open their bras, and it was all blurred. I don't think you even saw anything. And they would just go, shake it, baby, over and over again. And I totally did that for ages, because I'm seeing boobies. Yay! I'm seeing boobies. And again, if I was 16 or 17 or of a reasonable age, yeah, sure, I'm not going to see a problem with a 16 or 17-year-old girl. But that's not what I see. That's the important thing. That's not what I see. And that's where I was like, okay, this is just overtly, like, sexualizing these young schoolgirls. I'm not down with it anymore. Like, and it kept getting... It piled on very, very quickly at that point, and I was like, okay, I'm done. I'm absolutely done.
Only Sensei can go in there.
Please. I want to be alone with you. Somewhere like...
That will be the end of Persona 5.
It's been a while since I was able to catch Liv.
And I'm kind of thankful I did, right? Because those are my boundaries, and that's what turned me off. Not the gameplay or anything like that. That's what turned me off. And again, being at a different age, I don't think I'd have cared too much at all. But immediately after I stopped playing, and people were very understanding, they were like, yeah, okay, we get it. Yeah, this is where the line is drawn. That's totally fine. We're surprised you made it this far into this, because it's about to get way worse. And of course, people immediately started sending me the stuff. It's like, this is when I thought you would quit. This is when I thought you quit. I'm quite glad I didn't get there, such as one of your teachers turning up at your house and is like an escort and wants to massage you and stuff, which is very wrong. I don't need that in my life. Or mega, like, really strong penis monsters that you can make. Like, and this is where we talk about having your cake and eating too, because Chris pointed out after watching tons of anime, is like, they're trying to poke fun and play it off as like, like the devs are trying to say, we know this stuff is gross, we get it, and we're trying to show it in the format of like how ridiculous this is. But at the same time, they also put their female character in a skin-tight catsuit with the tail and the ears and sexualize that character as well. Which is like, yeah, they're poking fun of it. Because there was a lot of things in the game that I didn't understand. I didn't understand whether it was supposed to be just funny, that every single adult in the game is a complete lunatic and the worst person to ever existed in the history of time. The teachers were atrocious. The old man taking care of you is the worst person ever.
You're home. I
didn't need that.
Actually went to school today?
Oh, f*** you, man.
I guess you learned your lesson after what happened yesterday. As long as you're not getting into trouble, it's fine by me. I don't know what you've been up to, but trust me, you'll be gone if you start causing problems. In case you forgot, your life is not a free one right now.
This fucking guy is the worst every day.
Is this supposed to be from the lens of a high school teen student who sees the world as against them all the time? Right? While you're going through that emotional change. But at the same time, not really, because, you know, with the laws and culture or whatever, you did try and stop a rape, which is the initial start of the story, and you've ended up in the worst scenario ever, which might be a Japanese culture thing, and it became kind of a running meme of Shrug Japan, while trying to explain some of the bizarreness that was going on with the dialogue and the characters. Similar with the doctor, just going to a doctor and having random experiments put on you while she's sat there in a, like, fucking 5-inch heels, and clearly another character that you're supposed to romance in some way, and to make all that stuff happen. So it's doing all that, while simultaneously it still is putting out that sexualness to its characters in a non-ironic way. So it's kind of like it's giving with one hand while taking with the other to try and say, yeah, this is so, isn't this weird? Isn't this creepy? Isn't this fun? But also, we're going to give you this as well. And you can absolutely dress your characters in a maid or a bikini all the time if you want to. That's totally available to you as well as a choice. But I do want to say that it was kind of what I expected story-wise, and I really do wish the game was wrapped in a different wrapper. If it was just presented in a different package, you know, if it had a fantasy setting or a sci-fi setting or something like that, I probably would have enjoyed it a hell of a lot more, rather than very regularly, I'd say, pushing onto the sexualization themes of schoolgirls specifically, or school children even, which it does all the time. Like, I played, I want to say, I gave the game 21 hours, and that theme, that button is pushed every half hour at least. Something like that, whether you be in the Mind Palace, which is completely full of it, or some development in the story, or whatever it might be. Every half hour or so, they really do push that element where some element of the sexualization is there. And I'm also kind of happy to say that a lot of the female watchers of our stream were also becoming very uncomfortable with the game. Like, they were kind of happy we stopped. I didn't stop, like, from some white knighting. It was my personal boundary that was pushed. But afterwards, we're like, yeah, not digging this at all. Like, it's just all the time. It's thrust in our faces constantly with the leering, lechy characters trying to hunt us down, whether it be some pedophilic teacher or some student who's trying to get our clothes off so we can paint them, or that we wear skin-tight cat suits of leather every time we want to go into battle, whatever it might be. Yeah, this is kind of weirding me out. Like, it's too much. I don't like it. But that was it. I'm certainly not painting anime with all the same brush, which I think is the important thing. Is like, I get it. Anime is just the style that's presented to me. But yeah, and probably going forward, every time I see some young schoolgirl come up screeching and IARing or whatever, I'm just going to say anime. But just know in the back of my mind, I understand that that's not all anime. It's not all anime, but it is certainly the theme we'll go with there. So I hope you understand my thoughts on Persona 5. Chris wanted me to talk about this, and I think I've covered it successfully. Hopefully. All right? Please no weird comments, man, about the game and justifications. Like, whatever. Please don't. Bye, guys.